overview of tonight's presentation. So we will talk about why this session is being presented. We will look at the structure of the presentation. We'll look at some common mistakes and omissions. We'll look at problematic competency standards. And then we will be looking at the way forward for you guys. As Tabang stated, we will have a question and answer session. So please, if you have questions, feel free to type them and to stay until the end, until we address all your issues. So first of all, why are we having this session? So you will remember in February and March, we had the very content heavy, the long sessions where we gave you all the information regarding your CPDs. And I know when you first started, it was very difficult to see the relevance of everything, and you haven't actually been involved with your CPDs. But now you are actually familiar with the system, you've seen the format, you've completed some of the competency standards, and some of you have already received some feedback from the assessors. So from our point of view, the information will be a lot more relevant to you in tonight's presentation, and that's why Council and the assessors and moderators have decided to present this. And then we will also be sharing some of our experiences, because we have assessed quite a few CPDs, and there are some mistakes that we keep seeing, and we want to share those with you and the possible resolutions for those mistakes that we keep seeing. So if we talk about why this session, we want to talk about how you are feeling at this stage about CPDs. So are you very unhappy? Are you struggling? Are you unsure? Are you mad? Are you confused? And hopefully there are some of you that are happy with the CPDs that you have submitted up to this stage. So if you think about CPDs, maybe we can turn your frustration into happiness. Or if you are mad about something, we can address the issue for you. So whatever is happening with your CPDs, please feel free to ask us about it. So first of all, there's just some links I want to show you that's going to happen in the presentation tonight. If you see this little B with a slide, that will refer to a slide number in the previous presentation. So if you see a slide number, you can go back to the Intern Tutor workshop that was presented in February and March, and you can find the cross link between this presentation and that presentation on the slide number that is provided in the little speech bubble in the B with the B. Then there will be a explanation of the mistakes, and then you can find the fixes. So the mistakes you will see with the little unhappy B, and the guidelines and the suggestions you will see with the happy little B. So we'll give you a description, and we'll give you some fixes and how to avoid these errors. For the tutors, you will have a yellow speech block or a speech bubble. So if you see anything there will be some guidance for the tutors. And as you can see with the little B, it was presented on slide 75 to 77 in the previous presentation. So at this stage, I'm going to hand over to the next presenter, and he will be taking you through the mistakes and the omissions according to the various phases of the CPD cycle. So, Mr. Makadu, if you can take over.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Adele, for the time you have given me. Yes, the next session is about the mistakes and the omission. Looking at the generic issues, for example, we'll look at the reflection, the planning, implementation, and evaluation. So this is where we look at each of the CPD phases, and then we will articulate to you the common errors. The first one is under a reflection, where the common mistakes or the common errors that we see from your colleagues are the following. Number one, we often see colleagues writing or having incorrect competency standard chosen, sometimes no justification for chosen activities, and then the focus is only on content or recipient, and then in some cases there's no mention of intended application of new learning. So having all this, errors that are indicated on my left hand, then of course we have some suggestion as to how can you be able to get over this in trying to rectify. For example, the first one, under the incorrect CES chosen, make sure that the chosen competency standard is the correct one for your learning need. And then when you choose this competency standard, always make sure that to include the trigger incident. What do we mean by that? For example, what happened, or what made you choose, or what happened that caused you to identify your learning need. And then you also need to focus on the competency. For example, how you develop skills covered in your personalized learning need. You need to state the learning need in terms of the skills needed for the competency standard, and you need to say what you will do with what you learn. That is what we wanted you to do. And the next phase is also planning, where we see some errors as well. For example, you find that the resources mentioned, but without details. Quite often you see interns referring to a particular book, EDL, Martindale, without giving the clear details as to which page, what chapter, and so forth. As you can see on the right, we want you to be clear that when you give the reference of the resources, you need to give the clear details, like adding a chapter, a section, page numbers where appropriate. If you are reading the EDL, is it the hypertension chapter, whatever, or something like that. Planning is sometimes written in present or past tense. Colleagues, when you plan, is something that still need to come. So it cannot be in the present tense or not in the past tense. So planning should be written in the future tense. So make sure that when you are under planning session, you write it in the future tense. The rationale sometimes is not included when you do the planning. Planning is not only what you are going to do, but why. The why part also need to be factored in. Sometimes it becomes superficial, insufficient. Planning is like generally, too general in description, where you end up actually trying to search as to what is really happening here, or you want to understand what the intern is trying to say. So in response to that, you should use behavioral statement to guide your planning. And planning should be descriptive of activity and not be a general description. So after finishing doing the reflection and the planning, the next phase of the cycle is the implementation, which is quite too often is not supported by the evidence. The common errors that we have picked are the following. The text or description says what was done, but no evidence to support this. So we need you to provide evidence for all resources mentioned in planning and in the implementation, as I've already indicated. No link to evidence in implementation discussion. And the response to that is that you need to annotate exactly how the evidence proves what you have done. So quite often you see the document or the attachment with the label at the bottom, no annotation. So we need you to exactly annotate how the evidence proves what you have. So you need to show that through annotation. No link to behavioral statements in implementation discussion. Colleagues, I think you'll remember that each and every CS will have the BS. So as you do your implementation, you need to link that to all the BS. So you need to include links to evidence in implementation of the discussion. The example that I can give is like, for example, I applied the SOP in implementation. For example, evidence shows an annotated SOP. So someone will say, I apply the SOP, but when you go to the evidence, you do not see that SOP being annotated. So how do you respond to that, or how do you correct that? We include the links to behavioral statement in implementation discussion. Remember, just a copy of the SOP does not provide evidence of application. Still under the evidence, which in some cases is also insufficient, where you will see the blanket evidence. For example, for complete CS for more than one BS. How do you respond to that? You should provide evidence for each separate BS. If you have 4 BS, I think the advice we are giving it to you to say, please provide evidence for each of the BS. Most of the evidence given or provided in many cases is is covering less than 25% of the BS. So the requirement is to cover at least 25, but it will be good if you can cover all if possible, but the requirement is to cover at least 75. So clearly annotate each item of evidence to indicate which BS statement it is relevant to. Basically, in the evidence sections, you need to clearly annotate each item, and you should indicate which BS statement is relevant to, so that we only have to search for that information when we are assessing. Evidence sometimes is not annotated to indicate which BS it is relevant to. So on this, I think, we want you to add more piece of evidence. You can still achieve the requirement met even if one piece of evidence is rejected. But make sure that all the evidence that you attach is evidence, is annotated, and consider each BS statement as a standalone. In that way, I think it will guide you clearly on how to get this done. As I've mentioned in the previous slide, one big issue is annotation errors, either where it will be insufficient evidence, or we have evidence that is attached, just an evidence, no annotation, nothing. So make sure that each piece of evidence is linked to a specific behavioral statement. Annotation is messy or unclear. I think as you are going to upload this, if it's not clear from your side, obviously it won't be clear on our side as well. Ensure that annotation is detailed and neat. Inadequate annotation, as I've already indicated, show how evidence meet the requirements of each BS. Therefore, BS, when you go to the evidence, you should be able to prove or to show through annotation each and every evidence, how is it meeting or responding to the BS. Ambiguous labeling of evidence. Avoid use of A, B, C as evidence labels. Refer to specific BS instead. That is the advice we're giving it to you. Under the inappropriate evidence, it sometimes get long and unannotated, except from a reference material, where you see 3 pages attached, then you only see the label, probably maybe at the bottom, nothing annotated. So most important to annotate a relevance of uploaded material to a specific BS. So meaning that you will pick what you want to indicate there then you should annotate. I mean, unlike just attaching a long aspect from the reference. Ensure evidence is valid, is relevant to the competency standard, is accurate and is logical, and then is factually correct as well. The example here is calculation. If maybe you are doing the calculation for compounding, whatever you attach, I mean, the calculations need to be correct, obviously. That is in response to invalid evidence. Sometimes evidence is not legible, or the upload, I mean, you upload an evidence which is incorrect. Yeah, we sometimes see these things where an intern will be nicely articulating the description whatsoever, but when you go to the evidence, is something completely. So make sure that when you upload, you are uploading something that is relevant to the CS you're talking about. Make sure evidence is legible, not uploaded upside down as well. We want something in a proper position. Arranged in an illogical manner, arrangements sequence in a logical manner. That is what we require from you. Then the last part of the cycle is the evaluation, incomplete entries. Here, I want to bring attention to, I want you to understand or to know that you need to have all the required paths. Number one, you need to indicate what you have learned. Yes, after completing your CPD, under evaluation, you need to indicate what you have learned. It should be very clear in your description. How has the learning impacted your practice? You can do this by giving an explanation to say, yes, I've done this particular CPD, and this is the impact it has made in my way of working or in my practice. How have I applied this new competency? Describe a specific example where you used the skills you now have. You have learned, you have done the campaign and so forth, but how do you apply this new competency in your day-to-day work? Different from implementation scenario occurred after implementation scenario. Don't just give a vague statement such as I was able to do it again. So this is a guide to say when you apply this competency, it's not a matter of just I was able to do it again. What are my future learning needs? We also expect you to indicate your future learning needs under evaluation. Points under evaluation refer to scenario inactivity submitted and not to the competence standard in the behavioral statements. Points must be relevant to the CS and its related behavioral statements. Now, after maybe touching on the 4 phases, now we go to the writing style. Sometimes, or quite too often, you see that the text description provided is, it is very clear that the intern never proofread it. So I think that is what we want to highlight to you. Sometimes inappropriate language, use of a language, incomplete sentences. So text entered in the wrong place. So for example, planning under implementation, sometimes we do see this. Something that is supposed to appear under planning then is there. Right. On the one thing that I think you need to aware, or we always sometimes pick, is the breach of confidentiality. Remember, not yet competent will automatically apply if you breach any confidentiality, like serious breach of professionalism. So what the message to you is, watch out for patient details in places other than labels. If you are putting the attendance register, whatever, check that those details are hidden and so forth. includes all means by which patients can be identified. For example, the photo, the signature, check that the checkbox is used to obscure the patient. So all these kind of things, I think if you have a photo, you need to make sure that it has been obscured and so forth. So that is what you need to be aware of to cater for the confidentiality of patients. Then when you go under, when you resubmit your CPD, entries resubmitted without any changes. So sometimes we do see the same CPD that was returned is brought back like the way it was with no changes at all. Our advice to you is never ignore assessor comments. So go through the assessor comment and address them before you can resubmit. Do not bank on shortcomings being ignored the second time around. Decide whether not yet completed entry needs amendment or replacement. So that will be up to you. Again, when we continue under resubmission, entries resubmitted with incorrect or unacceptable changes. Don't falsify. Create evidence, for example, attendance registers, patient history, expiry dates, and batch manufacturing record. I think when my colleague is preparing to take over from the next slide, be clear about what is required when your entry requires resubmission. Over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makadu and Mrs. Nudia. So I'm Rihanna Hubert, and I will continue with the last section of this presentation. So now we're going to look at specific problematic competency standards that we have identified where majority of US interns struggle with. So it's important that you remember to read the whole competency standard first before you start with your activity. And if you can remember from the previous workshop in February and March, we made certain recommendations on certain competency standards, which of them is recommended, which of them are possible to do, and those that is challenging. And that those that are challenging is those that you should best avoid. You can look again on slide 61 to 67 of the workshop presentation to familiarize yourself again with these recommended competency standards. It is important that you should also consider separate behavioral statements. And before you start doing a competency standard, you must make sure that you can provide evidence that is sufficient for the behavioral statements. Mr. Makadu also touched on that. You have to provide evidence for, if there's more than 4 behavioral statements, for at least 75% of them. And if there are 1, 2, or 3, then you need to provide evidence for all of them. So let's look at, we start with domain 1. We're going to go through all 6 domains. Don't worry, we're not going to look at every competency standard, just a few that was identified that you struggled with. So domain 1, we must remember, is public health. And there's some concepts that we see you are confused with that, or it is not clearly understood. And the first one being public health, and on the other side, a health campaign. So remember that public health implies that the activities target or benefit a larger community audience, not one patient in the pharmacy or 2 patients, but the larger community. You should also remember to think clearly about what is meant with health promotion and primary health care. On the other side, the health campaign, which is part of Competency Standard 1.1, if you want to do a health campaign, you need to involve all the steps. You have to identify the health need. You need to prepare the intervention. You need to deliver the intervention to the target audience. And then important, and where most interns fail to provide evidence for, is to assess whether the intervention was successful. And with that, we mean that the public or that the participants understood what you told them. Were they able to take the action that you advised them on? So you need to show us in a way how it was, how that whole intervention was successful. So competency standard 1.1, it's promotion of health and wellness. Often we see that the audience is individual patients or it is colleagues. Remember, we said domain 1 is about public health. So you need to show us how you interacted with your target audience. Then we also see sometimes that it's a randomly chosen target and that audience is not really relevant to the message that you want to convey. So, for example, you are going to do a health campaign and you are going to provide information to diabetic patients, and then the target audience is pregnant ladies, or you're gonna provide a session to for health promotion and prevention to pregnant females, and then you do it at the HIV clinic or the diabetic screening clinic. So make sure that your target audience is that your audience is relevant. So you need to also describe how you develop the materials. It needs to meet health promotion requirements, and it should be relevant to the health message that you're going to provide. And you should also include sufficient activities to constitute a health campaign. Just handing out pamphlets is not a health campaign. So you must make sure about that. Then a few interns attempted 1.3, professional and health advocacy. And often behavioral statement A is totally ignored and behavioral statement B is misinterpreted. So, and then they only describe in-house policies. Remember, we said it's public health, so it is broader, it's bigger out there. So you need to clearly show your role as part of a healthcare team. And for behavioral statement B, you need to show how you have applied health policies. And policies refer to wider health policies. As I said, domain 1 is public health orientated. You must always make sure about that. If we move on to domain 2, a lot of you selected competency standard 2.2, which is patient counseling. And we often see that many of the behavioral statement requirements are not met. And there's not real evidence of communication with the patient, and that the counseling actually took place. So remember that you first need to establish the patient's understanding. Oftentimes we will see that the interns select 2.2, and then in the learning need, they identify or they say that they needed to, it was a patient that was newly or for the first time prescribed an inhaler, for example. And then the interns say that I did not know how an inhaler works. So I have to learn how to work, how the inhaler works, and then I need to provide the information to the patient. So remember that your learning need should focus then around the counseling. You did not know how to do counseling. And part of that is to establish the patient's understanding of the condition or the medication. And this you can do to include patient feedback. to verify that the counselling actually took place. You can provide your notes taken during a counselling session. Remember that you can also have a patient-specific counselling plan. Each patient is unique. And some patients will understand their conditions better than others. Some will understand how to use their medication better than others. So you should also take that into consideration. Then you should focus on the interaction with the patient, the actual counseling, and not only the medicine that you gave. Remember, if you just provide a photo of you and the patient with the patient's face blocked out, it doesn't prove that counseling took place. The same, there are interns that provide the dialogue between you and the patient. That doesn't prove that the counseling actually took place. I mean, how can you remember word for word what was said between you and the patient 3 days later when you do the CPD, or tonight at home when you try to capture the CPD and you have helped 20 other patients afterwards? So rather have someone that can verify for you, or that can provide a affidavit, and you don't need to go to the police station to make it a formal affidavit. You can have a witness that can write in their own handwriting with the names, the surname, signature, if it's a pharmacist or an assistant, the P number, to verify that they have witnessed you providing this counseling. And make sure that you have covered a sufficient number of the behavioral statements. Okay. Competence Standard 2.6, pharmacist-initiated therapy, is also a very is a favorite competence standard interns to do. We often see that patient history is not taken or not fully reported on. Here you need to go beyond merely saying that the patient history was taken. You need to show us how you took the patient history. You need to provide the patient responses. You need to include in your discussion how your evaluation of the history assisted in the choice of treatment. Again, here, the dialogue is submitted as evidence. Try not to do that. If the dialogue is submitted, then you need to verify it. It is always better if you know you're going to do pharmacist-initiated therapy, you know you will need to have patient history. So have a piece of paper where you write down patient's name, age, gender, medication history. Do they have any chronic conditions? Do they take chronic medication? What is their family history? And you can put that in. If it's in your own handwriting and you took it down while you were busy with a patient, it is fine. Some pharmacies have forms typed in or typed out forms that you can fill in with hand. It is fine. You can do that. Then it shows us that there was some interaction. You made notes while you were talking to the patient. So that is good. Remember that pharmacist-initiated therapy should not include a prescription. So don't build your entry around an item on a prescription. It is pharmacist-initiated therapy is initiated by a patient's request. Sometimes if behavioral statement D is submitted, it is the one that you need to refer a patient to a doctor, then there's no evidence to substantiating this. So if you refer the patient, then you need to provide a referral letter, and the referral letter must be verified as well. If we move on to domain 3, competence standard 3.4, medicine dispensing, is also one of the competency standards that is done by most interns. We often see that there is insufficient evidence to cover 75% of the behavioral statements, which should be 7. I think there's 9 behavioral statements, so you will need evidence for 7 of them. Often only behavioral statement A, where you have to see if the prescription is valid and authentic, is covered. We also see often that outdated or incorrect reference is used to verify the prescription for validity and authenticity. A lot of interns still use Section 28 of the Act. It is Section 33. It has changed in 2017, so make sure that you use the most updated references. Then one of the behavioral statements is compounding. You need to do extemporaneous compounding. And remember, antibiotic reconstitution is not compounding. Calculation, pharmaceutical calculations, then some interns determine the number of doses to dispense. That is also not a pharmaceutical calculation. That is purely counting the number of tablets. And if you need to calculate if the doctor prescribe 1 tablet daily for a month and you need to calculate that you need to provide 30 tablets, yes, then I think there's a problem. So remember, calculating the number of doses is not a pharmaceutical calculation. And then often references regarding dosages and appropriateness of medication is not submitted. It is also one of the behavioral statements to make sure that what is prescribed is appropriate for the condition. And then most doctors, you would know, does not really provide the ICD-10 code on the prescription. So it's difficult for you to determine if the medication that was prescribed is correct for the diagnosis that was made. But you should also check for appropriateness of dosages if it's kids or elderly or any patient for that matter. If there's no interactions on the prescription. So all of those aspects, all the phases of dispensing should be addressed. So it's important to consider the behavioral statement requirements as standalone activities. You may submit more than 1 prescription. Make sure that you use the latest references and don't attempt this competency standard unless you have example of proper extemporaneous compounding and pharmaceutical calculations. And your references must be submitted and annotated. Mr. Makadu spoke about annotation and how important that is. So always make sure that you cross-reference your annotations or your references or resources with the rest of your evidence so that it is very clear why it is included. Competence Standard 3.5, medicine compounding. A lot of interns do medicine compounding. Don't think that this is an easy competence standard because there's only 1 behavioral statement. This is definitely not true. Medicine compounding is a complex activity. A lot of interns ignore the requirement to apply pharmaceutical knowledge. Often there's missing or incorrect expiry dates for compounded products. The steps of the compounding process is not included as part of evidence. Calculations are sometimes not correct, and then your CPD will not be valid. And some interns also does not include compounding guidelines. For example, the GPP or the SOP that you've used. Remember, if you say in your planning you're going to consult the GPP section 2.18 for compounding guidelines, then we need to see that in the evidence. If you say in the planning you're going to use the compounding SOP of the hospital or the pharmacy, then we need to see that in your evidence as well. And you need to cross-reference and annotate to show how you have used those resources. So you need annotated reference material, including the SOP and the batch manufacturing record. Your evidence must prove your actions. So if we look at the evidence, we must be able to see that you have actually compounded this product. And please follow Regulation 3.1 of Act 101 of 1965 for the expiry date. If your institution uses a longer expiry date, longer than 30 days, then you should comment on how this does not fulfill the regulation, or you must provide additional evidence on stability of products. According to Regulation 3, the extemporaneously compounded medicine should never have an expiry date exceeding 30 days. So make sure about the expiry date. Ensure that all the steps of the compounding process follow pharmaceutical principles and that all of them are submitted. Make sure that you check your calculations carefully before you submit your evidence and before you actually do the compounding, and include your compounding guideline and annotate it appropriately so that it is clear that we can see how you have followed it. Okay, we move on to domain 4, organization and management skills. Often interns confuse or get confused between competence standard 4.4 and 4.6. 4.4 deals with quality assurance, while 4.6 deals with policy development. If you select 4.4, then you must make sure to include how you have participated in updating an SOP to get it and getting it approved, how you ensured the quality assurance was achieved, and the details of the document management system need to be in place. For 4.6, you must make sure to include how you have applied an SOP and how you have applied a policy. And you need to remember that SOPs and policies are not the same. It's two different documents. And the GPP is also not a policy. It is a guideline. So it is important that you only choose an SOP that you are able to do in your facility or where you are working. A lot of interns struggle here. There's only 2 behavioral statements with 4.6. A is apply policies and B is apply SOPs. And a lot of interns only apply the SOP. And then often they only provide the SOP with a lot of evidence, but they don't link them with annotations or cross-references so that it is clear how it was applied. Domain 5, competency 5.3 is the compulsory competency standard that you all need to do. It's ethical and legal practice. Often interns only consider dispensing a Schedule 6 prescription. You need to cover more activities because a Schedule 6 prescription cannot provide evidence for you to provide sufficient evidence to cover 75% of the behavioral statements. Often interns refer to outdated legislation, and if you do that, then you also do not adhere to behavioral statement C, where you say that you keep updated or keep abreast of new or updated regulations and legislation. So make sure that you're using the latest or the most updated legislation. A lot of interns ignore the professional indemnity requirements. Proof of indemnity cover submitted should be your own insurance. It should not be, it should be in your own name, not the hospital's indemnity cover, but your own, in your own name. If you look in the GPP, it states that you need your own professional indemnity. Some interns submit the indemnity application form. Then you do not adhere to indemnity guidelines. You don't have an indemnity yet. You have still applied. A lot of interns focus only on the legal and not the ethical aspects of practice. Remember, it's ethical and legal aspects, not just the legal aspects. And application of amended legislation is not submitted, and the legislation is not sufficiently recent. So it needs to be recent, updated, newest legislation. Remember to provide your evidence and explanation of your current or your valid indemnity cover. As I've said, it must be in your own name. Refer to the ethical practice guidelines, the code of conduct. And as I've also said, the amended legislation should be new or recent. And you should apply the recent or the most up-to-date legislation, and that needs to be submitted. The last domain is domain 6, education, critical analysis and research. So it's important to remember that this domain requires focus on education-related skills and not the subject of the training material. So you want to provide training and education to pharmacist assistants on calculation or dispensing practices. Then it should focus on not on the dispensing practices, but your focus should be for the CPD on education-related skills. Often there's also a misunderstanding of between 6.2 and 6.3. For competency standard 6.2, you need to provide evidence for an agreed teaching plan or training plan. A training plan is not that roster or schedule that the RP set up at the beginning of the year to say who is going to provide training when. That is not the training plan or the teaching plan. You need to provide evidence that you had guidance from an experienced colleague. Who is this experienced colleague and how did that experienced colleague guide you? And you should also provide evidence for the teaching and learning materials that you have developed. One of the behavioral statements, I think it's behavioral statement B, state that you need to do self-assessment. This must be your own self-assessment, not you ask the attendees to do you want to determine what they know or what their learning need is. It is your own self-assessment. So your own learning need must also be submitted, and the learning activity that you need to develop should refer to quizzes that you provided or that you developed. The way you're going to provide the training, is it going to be a PowerPoint? Do you going to give them a quiz or a survey? That is the activities. 6.3, Competence Standard 6.3 is relevant to the formal education of students. So if you provide training or education to colleagues or pharmacist assistants, then they do not fulfill this criterion. It needs to be formal education. So if you want to attempt 6.3, you need to provide evidence of the course or the module into which your training fits. So often academic interns attempt 6.3, but then you need to show us what was your role in the training, in the training that you provided. In the formal education, where did that fit in the bigger module or the bigger picture of the module or the course that the students did? Okay. Gonna give over now to Mrs. Nadia again. She's gonna end for us, talk about the way forward and how you can be successful with your CPDs.
Thank you, Dr. Huber. I know that was a lot of information, but I really hope you received some clear guidelines, or you understood where you went wrong if you had to do some resubmissions. So with the way forward and towards success for you guys as interns, what we do suggest is that, first of all, when you start, once you've selected your domain and you have your competency standards, read the entire competency standard very carefully. So you decide the domain, you read the entire competency standard, and then you look at the behavioral statements. So as you've now come to understand that the behavioral statements are the I want to say the things that you have to give evidence for. That is the thing that you have to show the assessor or the moderator that you are able to do, that you have acquired the skill that is mentioned within the behavioral statement. So it's very important to read everything before you start. Make sure that you will be able to achieve it, because remember, it's not a theoretical exercise that you are doing, because you have to provide evidence. Then go back to the training presentations, to the initial presentation that is available online from February and March, and look at this presentation as well. And then, very important, your manual. Please go back to your manual, look at the assessment grid, the assessment criteria that's provided on page 35, around about, I think. And then, if you received any feedback from an assessor, please have a look at that and pay attention to the specific issues that were addressed by the assessor or guidance that they gave you for things that you need to change or to resubmit, or maybe attempt something else, or to rethink your activity. Maybe it's just a small thing, patient confidentiality. Maybe it's something bigger that there's not sufficient evidence. So with these ideas, you will have a clear path as to how to continue forward. So the way forward for the tutors is, please remember to validate the entries that you've received. Encourage your interns to meet the deadlines. As you all know, we have an extended deadline, so you have some time after tonight to finish a CPD, maybe resubmit. And the tutors, please stay involved, assist your intern, make sure that they've completed all the phases and they've entered it in the correct place, that the evidence is valid, there's personal communication used, and before resubmission, ensure that all the comments have been resolved. Remember, your submission goes back to the same assessor and the same moderator, so they will check what the previous comments were, and then they will check if that has been addressed. So please check. Even if you are successful, maybe your assessor made a comment for future submissions. So just go and check. If you see the green and you're so happy it's successful, just quickly go and check on your report if there are any comments that you should address. So as we stated, there are some amended CPD submission dates. You are aware there's one now as well. You have until the 9th. Tabang, later on we can just maybe confirm that. You have until the 9th of June. You will know there were some system problems, so you can submit until the 9th for this cycle, and then you can submit on again before the 28th of June. And the July dates have also been adjusted slightly for you guys to be able to book for your exams in time to write the pre-registration exam in August. So Tabang, I don't know if you want to add anything on the dates before we go to the questions for the interns.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Adele. It's true, we have adjusted the current CPD submission deadline. We have extended it by a week because of the IT-related challenges that we experienced last week on Friday. Remember, the closing date was on the 2nd of June, and that has been extended until this coming Friday, which will be the 9th of June. And other than that, the other changes were also communicated to you. It's with regard to the July deadlines, wherein we tried to reduce the time so that you can be able to receive the results while the exam booking is still open, and that will allow you to book for the coming exams, although you will be affected by the late bookings penalties, or you will be expected to pay for the late booking fees. But yeah, you will have an opportunity to book in case you are meeting the requirements. And other than the June and the July deadlines, the schedule that we have shared with you, that is also there in the manual, will remain as is. That's all I can say with the CPD submission schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Taban. Okay, we are now open for questions. So I hope we have a lot of questions and we can assist you in any way that we can. So I'll now hand over to Council to present the questions that we might have so that we can address any issues any of you might have. Thank you.
Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
The first question is, with only a limited number of characters, is it hard to plan? It is hard to plan in such a way that it includes all of this. Is there no way of increasing the number of characters?
Thank you for the question. This is it's been discussed a lot of times in the past, and it is something that council need to approve. But 1,000 characters is there's a lot of interns that get it right and that is able to provide the necessary information in 1,000 characters. Remember, you don't need to write a book. You should be to the point when writing your planning. I don't know, Adele, if you want to add something, or Tabang.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ribar. I agree. If you carefully structure your planning or your implementation, it's really not difficult to fit it into the space that is provided. And I do think the 1,000 characters provide some a way for you to limit what you are telling us. The whole story can be provided in the evidence, but there's a lot of abbreviations you can use. What I do see is a lot of interns write out the South African Pharmacy Council. You can use the abbreviation within your CPD. If you want to refer to annexures, you don't have to say annexure A1, annexure A2. You can use A1, A2. So I do think there's a way to save some characters, to save some space, but it is enough if you focus your planning specifically to your activity. The space is definitely enough.
All right. The next question is, I was not able to take pictures during the public health campaign, like me giving an example of me giving a talk to the public. Is a letter or certificate of participation from my RP sufficient, or do I have to perform the task again?
I think I will start depending on the other evidence that you have available, a declaration from the pharmacist alone will not be sufficient. But if you have, for example, the handouts, attendance register, some more evidence, but if the declaration is the only evidence, then it might not be sufficient. Depending on the other evidence that's available, Rianda, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, thanks, Adele. I agree with what you said. It will depend on the other evidence that you have, but only a declaration won't be sufficient. And it's important what your role was. If it was a big campaign with a lot of different activities, what was your role as an intern? What specifically did you do during that campaign?
The next question, with regards to domain 4, can I use the policy found in the SOP that I'm applying, or does one have to look for other policies that govern the SOP?
Okay, I'll answer this one. No, you are allowed to use the policy that is in the SOP. A lot of interns miss that part that there's a policy statement, and then but you must make sure that you annotate properly that you have, and then show how you have applied that policy and that SOP. So just make sure about your annotation and that you and that you acknowledge that is the policy and that you have applied it. I've answered the question.
With regard to evaluation, does my new learning need have to be within that very same domain that I have just done?
Yes, it is always better. It should be in the same domain. If you have selected, for example, 4.6 and you have now applied an SOP, then a lot of interns write that their future learning need is that they still need to apply the SOP for, they have now done compounding and now they still need to apply the SOP for procurement. So if you still need to learn how to apply a SOP for procurement, then it means you have not yet learned how to apply a SOP or a policy. So your future learning needs should relate to the competency standard or the domain that you have done your activity in, but not the product that you have used, not so it must be around the skill that you have learned. So anything regarding within the domain or the competency standard. Don't say if you have done pharmacist-initiated therapy, your future learning need is you have to learn how to do compounding. It needs to be within the domain or within the competency standard.
I have academic interns and they do not complete their internship within a year period. We submitted a CPD this year. The CPD activity itself took place last year and it was unsuccessful. One of the reasons was that it was not current. Can academic interns not submit their CPDs over a longer period of time? Can the assessors please provide constructive feedback to assist the intern and the tutor, especially new tutors?
Thabang?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Noktula. Yeah, when we're saying the CPD is valid is when the evidence has been collected during the period of internship. So for an academic intern who will spend a number of years as an intern, like in this case, the evidence that was collected last year, as long as the intern was already registered with us as an intern, that evidence is still valid. So I will request the intern to submit a query to the office. I think at the end, the intern should submit a query to the office and then we will be able to attend to that. That evidence is still valid. Thank you.
Okay. May I get a clear understanding on what exactly a policy is?
Can I come in there as well? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. The policy, I think the good example that one can give, in this country, we have a national drug policy. That should be a policy. You have infection control policy. So those are the example of the policies. Normally, the policies developed at a higher level, and the SOPs are normally like at the institution. So that is how I can explain on the difference between the SOP and the policy. Thank you. The Medicine Control Act and the GPP, as the colleague said, those are not policy. Thank you.
Okay, next question. If one prescription covers two behavioral statements, is it okay to refer to the same prescription for both the specified behavioral statements?
Yes, I'll take that one. Yes, one prescription can be used for more than one behavioral statement, but what interns sometimes do is they, on top of the prescription, or wherever on the prescription, they say this prescription addresses behavioral statement A and B, but they don't say why. So what we would suggest is annotate each behavioral statement separately and tell us why that is applicable to that one prescription. So it is allowed, but you have to annotate clearly and telling us why the two behavioral statements is applicable on the one prescription.
Can I use an act as a policy?
I think that is already, I've already answered it. The act is not a policy. I've given the example of the policies. Thank you.
Can I speak to my assessor if I'm unsure what they meant in their comments?
Okay, thank you, Noctula. Yes, in the interns manual, we have provided the criteria which the intern need to meet in order for them to speak to the assessor. So it's indicated in there that when you have received your feedback from the assessor, you need to respond based on the feedback that you receive. And in that case, if you don't understand, you are to consult with your tutor for assistance and then submit. And in case you fail the same CPD after your second attempt, then you are allowed to request the office to arrange a consultation meeting with the assessor. Thank you.
Are you allowed to completely change the topic of the CP?
Yes. Sorry. Sorry,
No,
Adele.
you can go. I'll add if there's something.
No, you are allowed to change the topic. Usually, or often it is not able to just fix the entry, and you have to do it over. So you are more than welcome or more than allowed to change the topic. Mrs. Nadia?
Yes, thank you. I just want to add there is please don't submit a new CPD. Just edit the one that was sent back and change all the information that you want to. Remove the old evidence, add your new evidence. So edit the submission that you want to change. And you can either edit or you can change it completely, but do not create a new submission.
Okay. Can we be allowed to delete and resubmit our CPDs? Tonight's session was informative and we would like to redeem ourselves and do things right.
Yes, Tabang, I think you should answer. I don't know if I understand the question correctly.
Okay, thank you, Adele, Rianda or Adele. Yes, when the assessor feedback is received, the interns have, the system is designed in such a way that the interns will be able to edit the CPD and put in the new information depending on what they want to correct. Deleting a CPD is not possible, especially for an entry that has already been assessed. So in case maybe the intern wants to change the competency standard, then that should be communicated with the Office for Assistance, which we prefer it to happen if it has been recommended by the assessor. So the assessor should advise the intern to say whatever you have mentioned in your entry is relevant for a particular competency standard. Please consider changing and submitting under that competency standard. In that way, we are in a position to can assist, or maybe in case the intern has changed the sector of pharmacy, and in that case, they are unable to continue with a particular competency standard. Yes, in that case, we can also assist them to change. And deleting is just not possible once an entry has been submitted. Thank you.
May I just maybe add, if you as an intern have submitted your CPD for verification and your tutor have not yet verified it and you want to change it, then I would say ask your tutor to send it back to you as an intern, and then you can do it over before it gets submitted. But if it's already submitted for assessment, it cannot be deleted.
Domain 2 has a lot of behavioral statements, but the number of characters is the same as those with only one behavioral statement. Can you please increase it for only that domain?
I think I'll take it. Unfortunately, the system is the same for all the competency standards and all the domains. And a lot of interns are successful, especially with 2.2. I think it has a lot of the communication and the consultation has a lot of behavioral statements, but the space actually is sufficient if you have concise planning and concise information that you provide there. The space is sufficient.
Is the June CPD deadline the only deadline for CPD submission that is amended or will be amended?
I'm sorry, Noctula, may you please repeat the question?
Is the June CPD deadline the only deadline for CPD submission that is amended or will be amended?
Okay, for the June deadline, we have amended only the date for CPD submission. The CPD will be, results will be released on the date that was initially scheduled, which is, I think, is the 23rd of June. And then we have also made some amendments to the July submission deadlines. Other than that, everything will continue as it was planned initially. Thank you.
A question from YouTube. How should we make Domain 1 Competency Standard 1.1 Promotion of Health and Wellness multidisciplinary or prove that it was in a multidisciplinary?
I don't know if one of the other assessors or moderator, or Rianda, you can assist. I'm not sure what the question is asking with multidisciplinary in 1.1, because 1.6 is a multidisciplinary team where you do primary health care. So maybe if that candidate that asked the question can just give us some more information or some guidance. I don't know, Rianda or Mr. Makadu.
Yes, I'm also not sure. 1.1 does not involve or include a multidisciplinary team, so I'm not sure. I'm also not sure about that question. Yes, I would also advise that the intern or just explain the question or structure the question again.
Another question from YouTube. One of the CPDs which I did on domain 4.3, the pharmaceutical infrastructure management, was returned with one of the comments saying that the competency standard I chose is hard for an intern to do as interns are not in managerial positions in their workplace. However, I did mention in the write-up that I received the assistance from the senior pharmacist and the manager. So I would like to know, are interns not supposed to do competency standard 4.3 pharmaceutical infrastructure management?
Um, 4.3 is one of those that we said is not. It's more challenging to do for an intern. It depends on all your evidence that you have submitted. Yes, it's difficult to comment on that comment if we haven't seen the evidence. So I'm not sure, but it is a difficult one for interns to do. 4.6, for example, is much easier to do. But I will have to see all the evidence before I can say make the comment or comment on why it was not successful. I don't know if Mrs. Nadia or Mr. Makadu want to add.
Yes, Randa, I agree. 4.3 is doable. It's difficult. And we see a lot of the times that the interns look at the behavioral statements, but not under the context of infrastructure management. If you look at the behavioral statements, they sometimes seem, I just want to quickly go to 3.4. I know them, but I don't know them. It's 4.3, eh? Yeah, it's 4.3. If you look at prioritizing and organizing workflow and demonstrate time management, for example, then the intern will put in a timesheet. But if you look at the competency standard, it's infrastructure management. So it's difficult for an intern to link the behavioral statements to the competency standard. So I would suggest thinking about this again, or focus completely on infrastructure management. Dr. Huber, I don't know what you want to add to that one, but it is doable.
Yes. I don't think I need to add anything, but focus on the title of the competency standard, and the behavioral statements it must focus on infrastructure management. And infrastructure, if you need to look at the some interns look at the equipment, and then they look at the counting trays and stuff like that, which is not, it is not what is meant with the infrastructure of the pharmacy. That's why we say it is difficult, but yes, it is doable.
What course of action should I take if my current practice site does not provide opportunities for extemporaneous compounding activities, and switching to domain 3.5 is not feasible?
I'm not sure where the intern is doing internship. If it is a community or a retail pharmacist or the institutional pharmacy, then they're supposed to be able to do extemporaneous compounding. If it's manufacturing, then the intern, in any case, need to do the 400 hours practical training, and then they should go to a retail or a community pharmacy or an institutional pharmacy where they will be able to do extemporaneous compounding. So it's one that every intern should be able to do.
What is the reason for the domain containing competency standard for manufacturing interns relating to day-to-day industry activities being removed from the manual?
May you please repeat the question, Noctula?
What is the reason for the domain containing competency standards for manufacturing interns relating to day-to-day industry activities being removed from the manual?
Okay, I'm not sure which domain the intern is referring to, because we have always been having 6 domains and we're still having 6 domains. Maybe the intern should clarify which competency standard is she referring to. Unless if I'm missing something, Rianden, Adele, or Matado, maybe you can add.
No, Tabang, no competency standards were removed. Maybe the intern referred to before we used the domains and we had the competencies, then there were some that was only focused on manufacturing. But with the new domains that we've been using since, I think, 2018, nothing has been removed since then.
A question from YouTube. For 4.6, can we talk about a different policy and SOP, or do they have to relate to each other?
No, I'll take that one. They can relate to one another, or they can be completely separate. It doesn't matter. The intern can decide what they want to submit there.
We are still experiencing problems relating to submission, especially if we try to submit before and now change the information.
I'm not sure what the intern is referring to, because submissions are coming through. Yes, we had challenges on Friday, And maybe in case he or she is struggling, maybe needs to contact the office, and then we assist that intern as an individual, because currently we are not experiencing challenges. There are some interns who contacted the office, and we were able to assist them. Sometimes you find that the challenge is with regard to connectivity and so forth. So maybe that intern should notify the office, and then we will assist in that regard. Thank you.
My tutor suddenly quit and gave notice this month. I have submitted all 6 CPDs. Will my internship be delayed?
Yes, because once the tutor resigns and notify the council that is no longer tutoring you as an intern, then it means you are no longer having a tutor, and that's why it will affect the day, the number of days of your tutor, of you as an intern. So remember, we don't only need a tutor for the purpose of submitting CPDs, but the tutor should be there to give you support throughout the year of your internship. So I think that intern should just focus on finding another tutor so that we can do the session of contract, and then she be attached to that tutor so that they don't have to be delayed when they are to complete their internship. Thank you.
I always get a comment that future learning need has not been stated. For example, when completing Domain 1 Public Health, how is saying, I plan to use what I learned in this learning need in future public health campaigns, not enough to be deemed a future learning need.
Okay, I'll take that one. If you say you plan to use what you have learned, then what is it that you still need to learn? So that is the question that you need to ask yourself. What is it that I still need to learn about public health care? So you can't say that what you have learned you will use. That is not a future learning need. A future learning need is something that you don't know. You have done this and this and this, and now you realize, okay, I've done all of these, but now I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z. So that is what a learning need, a future learning need, should relate to, should be.
What is the minimum number of people when doing the public health campaign?
There is no minimum number of people. If your campaign can address the larger community or the larger public, then it will be fine. So there's no minimum number of people. It depends on your topic. I don't know, Adele, if you want to, or Mr. Makadu, if you want to add.
Yeah, Sandra, I agree. There's no minimum, but it can't be one. Then it's not a public health campaign, and then you don't have an audience to show how the information is getting to the community or is getting out there. So with saying there's no minimum number, one person doesn't. You can't have a campaign with one person. So it should show that the information is available to the public. And it's important information that the community wanted to know or to learn about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I fully agree with colleagues. Yes, if the intention is to reach the public, so certainly, showing even one or two, I think it may. It's not really enough because the intention is to reach the public. So I think, although as we don't have a minimum number, but an intern should be able to gauge to say, but this information can be one person or two people. Thank you.
I did a public health campaign and attached pictures of me presenting as well as other accompanying evidence. My assessor failed me because I had no register, although the picture was there. It was mentioned that when resubmitting, we must not add new evidence. How can I now go about it when the assessor said the register is missing?
Maybe let me try the first part of the picture of the intern. If it's only the picture of the intern without seeing the other information on the background, so that is not actually an evidence, enough evidence that we have done the campaign, because, and especially if maybe there's no register as well. I think the other colleague may cover the second one.
Can you just repeat the second part of the question?
It was mentioned that when resubmitting, we must not add new evidence. How can I now go about it when the assessor said the register is missing?
Okay, maybe let me come in. Or Rianda, you can.
Okay, Natabang, you can go first.
Okay. Yes, when the intern is doing a resubmission, they are supposed to respond to the assessor's comment. If the comment is that the evidence provided is insufficient, then it means the intern should add. The system does allow the intern to submit additional evidence. So I don't know why the intern is saying they are not allowed. They are allowed. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Tabang. I think what the intern also means is that especially with something like an attendance register that was not there the first time around, some of it might look suspicious if suddenly the attendance register now appear after 3 or 4 months have gone by. So it's usually the assessor would say, especially for 1.1, you must redo the activity to prevent or to help or make sure that the intern does not need to fabricate or want to fabricate evidence to now suddenly add an attendance register. It is, yes, and then if you should also make sure that it is clear that you have presented that information. So if you provide photos, it's fine. It must just be clear that, or firstly, you must not breach patient confidentiality. So preferably, you should take the picture from behind the patient so that you are visible but not the patient's faces, or you should block out their faces. And then in that picture, it should be clear what you were talking about. So either you're in front of you have the poster that you made, or you have the presentation at the back, and then additional information or evidence on how you have make sure that this campaign or this health talk was successful, that the patients understood it in some way. But yes, you can, for certain activities, you will be able to add evidence if it's not sufficient. For other activities, it would be better to redo the activity than just to add evidence. If it's compounding and your expiry date was incorrect, or your batch manufacturing sheet was not there, or your calculation was incorrect, or whatever the case might be, then it would be better to start over and do a new activity, because that is done. The medicine, the mixture have been dispensed and given to the patient, and it's gone, and you can't redo it. You can't fix it now. So some is fixable, some is not fixable.
I submitted my CPD on the 1st of June and my tutor verified it on the 2nd of June, as per the old deadline. Will I be able to work on it, or do I have to wait now since it's already submitted?
Okay, the intern will have to wait for the feedback because since it is already submitted, unfortunately, we don't return CPDs until the date that we release the results. Thank you.
Is feedback from one patient enough to determine that the patients understood what I was saying during public health campaign?
No, we need more than, because then it can be, yeah, it needs to be more than one.
If I have already submitted 6 CPDs and I switch tutors, will my new tutor be able to verify CPDs that have been returned?
Okay, thank you, Noctula. Yes, once the intern is linked to the new tutor, then the new tutor will be able to view the CPD. So it's important for the intern to make sure that they notify council of the of the new tutor. They do what we call session of contract, and then they enter into a new contract with a new tutor. And then once that is done and council has approved everything, then the new tutor will be able to view all the entries and be able to do the verification. Thank you.
I received not yet successful on a CPD submission. I reviewed the moderator's comments on my phone and logged off. However, when I logged on again from my laptop and tried to view the errors, I was unable to, and it reflected submitted for moderation again. How can this be resolved without affecting the amount of times I can resubmit CPDs, as we have to pay after it exceeds a certain amount?
Okay, yes, from the office, we are able to see the CPDs that were submitted without any changes made. And we have been receiving a number of queries with that as a challenge, which we are currently investigating with our developer. So for now, the intern should just submit a query to the office so that we can return that CPD to them so that they can be able to work on the comments from the assessors. Although we're going to check first if there were changes made to the entry, unfortunately, we won't send it back. Thank you.
Question from YouTube. If I'm already competent in 3 CPDs, do I have to submit the other 3 by the 9th of June, or as long as I submit before bookings open up?
As long as they submit before, the bookings are opened, or even during the bookings, I think they can still submit. Thank you.
Why are the sectorial progress reports not specific to the sector? The sectorial report for manufacturing sector has no items pertaining to industry on the checklist, no applicable or relevant assessment.
I think they are referring to the progress report. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to can answer that. Maybe the intern should submit the query. I'm more familiar with the CPD than the progress report. That is not part of my area of competency, but we will always be able to assist. Unless Megam, I'm not sure if she's still with us. Maybe she can advise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Metamang. So when the progress reports were developed, they were developed taking into consideration what the interns will be doing in that specific sector. So maybe the interns can send us a request and be clear in her inquiry, because all the progress reports were developed to take into consideration what the intern is required to do in that sector of pharmacy that they are doing their internship. Thank you.
For domain 4 under competency standard 4.4 quality assurance, does it have to include specifically updating an SOP, or can we attend a training session on how we can apply the SOP to ensure quality assurance?
Sorry, I struggled to find the unmute button. I'm not 100% sure what the behavioral statement is saying, but I know there is one that is specifically focused on updating an SOP, and then you need to show how you have participated to update an SOP. And then there's also one where you need to provide or receive training on the SOP, that you need to provide evidence of that training.
Question from YouTube. If you had submitted 4 CPDs after the first deadline, end of March, but before the second deadline, end of April, shouldn't their feedback have been in by end of May?
Okay, thank you, Nektula. Yes, if the CPD has been submitted by a particular deadline, then the feedback should be available on the set date on which the results were supposed to be released. So in case the intern didn't receive the feedback as scheduled, can they just inform us in the office, and then we will look at that and see how best can we accommodate them. Thank you.
Please provide examples of health campaigns in small pharmacies, as handing out brochures is insufficient.
I think we like we said before, and we know that in the small farmers there may not be enough patients. Like we said, if the number is 1 or 2, certainly it won't be enough. So I think if one need to conduct a campaign, one may need maybe to wait for the number, or to do something that will bring the people around for campaign, because certainly you cannot use one patient or two as a participant for the campaign, as the intention is for the public. Thank you.
Yes, I just would like to add, perhaps organizing a screening day in the pharmacy. That is a good health campaign, and then everything around that you should then include as part of your planning and your evidence. So there's ways to do that in a community or small pharmacy. Retail pharmacy, you can organize these days, and in that way then be able to provide sufficient evidence for that competency standard.
I was given the following comment. The case you present as a trigger cannot be the same case you provide as evidence for 5.3. So am I not allowed to use a prescription as a trigger and evidence?
I'll take this one, but this is a difficult question to answer without seeing the evidence. It's difficult to just have the comment and to have the context of the submission. But if an activity triggered your learning need, then that is the activity that you should plan for. Maybe that intern can provide a little more detail, or maybe, I don't know, Rianda or Mokado, what do you think? It's difficult with just the comment without seeing the context and the evidence to give any comment on this or feedback.
Yeah, you are right. I mean, some of the issues, yes, as they are being spoken, as we hear them, but you may need more info for you to be able to answer appropriately. Yeah, I think that is what I can answer as well.
Usually, if you have the intern said it's 5.3. So I assume, and this is now an assumption that I make, that it was a Schedule 6 medication. So probably it would be something like I received this prescription and I was not sure if it's a legal prescription, or I was not sure how to dispense Schedule 6 medication, and this triggered my learning need to know how to practice legal and ethical. Then you can use the prescription as evidence. I don't know why. I'm not sure what was the you see, that's where it comes in. What was the other evidence that you provided, and what was the other comments that the assessor provided? But in my opinion, it would be fine if you use that prescription and then say how you have evaluated and make sure it is legal and ethical. But yes, I don't know what kind of prescription it was, and I'm not sure about the other evidence. So, but yes.
For CPD 2.5, are therapeutic outcomes monitoring and therapeutic drug monitoring the same thing? The assessor returned my CPD for not including TDM in my evidence and write-up.
Can you just repeat? It's therapeutic outcome monitoring and?
Therapeutic drug monitoring.
No, it's not the same. Therapeutic outcome monitoring is about the outcomes that you had with the treatment, and the therapeutic drug monitoring is the actual monitoring of the usage of the medication, not the outcome thereof. So it's two different aspects.
How do I know if my CPD was successful? I got feedback on what to fix. However, the other CPD that I submitted in the first cycle has no report or response. Also, there has been no update on my progress.
Okay, thank you, Noktula. When the CPDs are after they have been assessed and moderated and the results are released, when the intern opened the particular CPD, there is at the bottom of that particular entry, it will show whether it is successful or unsuccessful. And usually a CPD that is not successful, it will have a status that says awaiting submission, meaning the intern must look at the report and resubmit. And then a CPD entry that is successful, after the intern has opened it, it will retain the status of submitted for compliance. So once the status changes from submitted for compliance to awaiting submission, after you have opened a particular CPD entry, that will tell you that you are not successful. So you must just go through the report and then make necessary changes. Thank you.
If I'm already competent in 3 CPDs, can I still submit my remaining CPDs before the 28th of June deadline and register for my pre-registration without having to pay for the late registration fee?
Okay, CPD entries that are going to be submitted by the 9th, which is this coming Friday, and the results are going to be released by the 23rd. So anybody who met the CPD requirements by that time won't be penalized, or they will be able to book. And if you have only submitted 3 CPDs and you are already successful, and then maybe you submit during the late booking period, you won't be penalized. I mean, if you submit, maybe you submit the remaining 3 entries later. As long as you book within the normal booking period, you won't be penalized. So penalties will apply to those who don't meet the CPD requirements during the normal booking period. So as long as you're booking, maybe like those who going to book after the release of the results on the 19th of July, those will be affected by the late booking penalties. Thank you.
Do we get the same assessor for all CPD entries?
Yes, you do. And it is not supposed to change. Sometime an assessor gets sick and they are not able to assess a specific cycle, and then you might get assigned to a new assessor or a different assessor. But usually the one, if you haven't been assigned, or if an assessor has been assigned to your CPDs, then that is the assessor that you will have until all your CPDs are successful. The same with the moderations.
Is it possible to do a PIT in a public hospital? If not, what regulation prevents pharmacists in public hospitals to do PIT? I'm asking this because it's not always easy to get a retail pharmacy just to complete a CPD.
Usually it is not possible for interns in institutional pharmacies to do pharmacist-initiated therapy, because they only see, especially in public hospitals, because they only see patients that come from OPD and they have prescriptions. There is no over-the-counter opportunity or function that they can use. So what we would advise then, if you can't get into a community pharmacy, then you should select one of the other competency standards from domain 2 to do this patient counseling and this communication. So there's others that you, counseling and consultation. So there's different ones that you can then select. That's why we say do what is doable in your practice setting.
I received a comment from my moderator for my evidence section, and they said I should not use my own referencing numbers as evidence 1 to 10. Please, can you advise on how else to label evidence for my CPD?
Okay. I think I don't know what the moderator meant with that question, but how I can advise the intern is to make sure that if you number your evidence or you label your evidence, then the labeling must be consistent throughout. It must correspond. So if you use in your evidence document 1A, then in your description it should also be document 1A, not A1. If I understand correctly, if that is what was meant by the moderator, I'm not sure, but yes, and it's always good to link you should link your evidence to the behavioral statement. So maybe use that as a way to label the evidence. I'm not sure if I've answered the question. I don't know if Mrs. Nadia or Mr. Makado want to add something.
Okay, maybe. So what I've seen in most cases anyway is that under a description, an intern will describe the evidence and put them, for example, to say A1 under description. Maybe the way I'm understanding it is that when you go to the evidence, you should see something that links back to the description. So it cannot be any other reference number than what you referred in the description. That is how I'm understanding it. Thank you.
Please explain what extemporaneous compounding is.
Okay, extemporaneous compounding is any mixture that you make in the pharmacy. If you make a compound of 2 or 3 or 4 creams or ointments, then that is extemporaneous compounding. So it is something that is prepared in a pharmacy for a specific patient on a prescription from a prescriber.
My moderator marked my CPD as not yet successful and required me to provide a signed by the patient transcript of the counseling as evidence. However, like we just learned, it's nearly impossible to do. I submitted a declaration signed by the pharmacy supervisor and another pharmacist who watched me counsel the patient. I provided multiple other pieces of evidence. Please advise.
Again, is that the only comment that the intern received? Was that the only issue? Because from the description, it sounds like it might be sufficient, but it's difficult to say without looking at the evidence. Well, I would suggest that this intern, depending on how many submissions they have, and if they fall under the guidelines, they should speak to their own assessor in this case. Unless there are other comments that need to be addressed as well. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to add anything to that.
I have nothing to add. I agree with the answer you gave, Adele.
With regard to evidence that counseling occurred, does it need to be in my tutor's handwriting, or is it a typed description of what she observed with her signature and P number? Is that acceptable?
Yeah, handwritten or typed from the tutor will be acceptable.
When a change of tutor occurred within the same sector, when the previous tutor never submitted the CPDs and the new tutor submitted the CPDs which the previous tutor reviewed, are those CPDs still valid, or do they need to be redone under the new tutor?
May you please repeat the question, Noctula?
When a change of tutor occurs within the same sector, when the previous tutor never submitted the CPDs and the new tutor submitted the CPDs which the previous tutor reviewed, are those CPDs still valid, or do they need to be redone under the new tutor?
Okay, thank you. For a tutor to submit the CPDs, remember the system will require the tutor to verify. So it means even though the previous tutor has reviewed the CPD, the new tutor will have to review them before submitting them for assessment. Unless if the new tutor just want to submit, but you can't consent for something that you have seen, because when you submitting as a tutor, you're trying to say, I've verified this and I'm happy with what the intern has submitted. I'm agreeing with everything. You're giving consent. So the new tutor has to verify and submit.
For competency 5.3, there are 5 behavioral statements. Applying the 75% rule means that one can complete 4 behavioral statements. Is professional indemnity a must to have evidence for, or can any of the 4 make part of evidence?
Any of the 4, you have to address any 4 behavioral statements. It's always better to address all of them. You and your assessor might not agree that you fully addressed a behavioral statement, and then you can fall back onto the other one, but you can select any 4.
What type of evidence can I submit for competency standard 2.2 behavioral statement Establishing existing understanding and knowledge of health conditions, medicine's use for a patient, and the need for counseling. Is a survey asking a patient prior to counseling what they understand about their condition sufficient evidence? And are we allowed to show patient's signature on the patient feedback survey?
Yes, that survey will be sufficient. Remember, when we talk about patient confidentiality, it means that we should not be able to identify a person or a patient. So there should be no information on that form or on that survey that we can use to identify a patient. If his signature is Van der Merwe, but there's no name linked to it or whatever, then you can't really identify that person. But if the name and the surname is there and there's, so you must just make sure that with patient confidentiality, we mean that we should not be able in any way to identify that person. So if there's a cell phone number and I'm able to phone that number and get to that patient, then you have breached patient confidentiality. So if the patient's signature is on there and it's only the signature with nothing else, then I think it will be acceptable.
Yeah. And Rianda, if I can add to that, I received a CPD this week. The patient name was covered up, but they left the ID number and the telephone number and the medical aid number. So there's too many items that's identifiable for that patient. So it's not only the name and the surname, but if you provide something and there's no way we can go to that specific person or that we can identify that specific person, then that is fine. And you should remember, we might know the patient, so the face is also very important.
I completed CPD 3.5 compounding of medicine, which was returned due to the expiry date exceeding a month. At my institution, the expiry date is determined by the ingredient that will be expiring first. Hence, the expiry date of my compound was after 2 months of compounding. My assessor said this cannot be corrected and I should redo the activity and submit a new CPD with a different implementation. Since I work under supervision and my institution insists on their own expiry date determination, what then?
Maybe I can take that one, and Rianda and my colleague can add. Maybe in that case, you should add an explanation why they have done it that way, why the institution insists on doing it that way. Your tutor can maybe add an explanation as well, but then you will have to address that expiry date, because the Medicines Act is quite clear in the regulations that it states 30 days. So on what are they basing that 2 months? Can they give stability information? Then you will have to look at the, I think maybe the, that one, the thick book, can't remember now, some kind of a codex or something that you can prove that there is stability after 2 months. So if they insist on that, you'll have to provide additional evidence to show that you know it's 30 days, but the stability according to these references, I don't know, Rianda, because the Act stands 30 days. Tabang, maybe, or Kamu, maybe any one of you can give us some guidance.
Okay, let me come in first. Yeah, you are right. The Medicine Act, if they are saying it should be 30 days, a facility cannot come up with something in contrary to what the Act is saying. Like you said, unless if maybe there's something that can be proven, but in most cases, we need to adhere to what the Act of the country is saying. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with that.
I sent my CPD with application for indemnity. Does that mean my CPD will be unsuccessful?
It depends on the other evidence that was submitted with that, but you can expect the comment that you do not, your evidence for behavioral statement D is not sufficient because it's only the application. So depending on the rest of the evidence and the way it was annotated and linked to the behavioral statements, you might be successful, you might be not successful. That, yes, it depends on what you did.
I submitted 3 CPDs before the 1st of June. The assessment status says not available in red for 2 of them and in green for 1. What does this mean?
Thank you. Interns should note that once they have submitted the CPD entry, it has to go through the process of moderation and assessment. So that language is not for them. What needs to happen is for them to wait for the release of results. So the color code, it has got nothing to do with them. They need not worry about it as long as they have submitted. And yeah, the other part is for the office to take care of. Thank you.
How do we know if our tutor has not verified our CPD submission yet?
Okay, the status of the CPD, remember after an intern has submitted, the status will show that submitted for tutor verification. So as long as the status is still submitted for tutor verification, it means the CPD entry is still with the tutor and has not yet been submitted for assessment. So they must just check on the CPD status. Thank you.
Can any qualified pharmacist sign my CPDs?
Okay, I'm not sure about signing because the tutor is the one who can be able to view your CPD entries, unless if maybe you need maybe you are dispensing, you want someone to authorize whatever you are doing. Yes, in that case, any pharmacist can do it. Maybe Adele Rianda Makado, maybe you can add.
Yeah, maybe Tabang, if I can add, for academic interns, for example, their tutors are at the university, so they do have another pharmacist that signs. The verification stays with the tutor, but the signing, if you did something with another pharmacist where they've witnessed you doing anything or they assisted you to do anything, then they can sign as well, or they can give a declaration that they witnessed you doing this. But as we said, the verification online stays with the tutor. But any pharmacist can give you some evidence or assist you with your evidence or witness that they saw you do something.
I am creating an SOP for the pharmacy I work at as part of Domain 4, Competency Standard 4.6. What is meant by behavioral statement B? Does it mean that I must show that I used the created SOP in practice, or does it mean that I must use other SOPs in my evidence? If I must use other SOPs in my evidence, can I use SOPs from a different pharmacy?
There's a lot of questions in this one. Maybe the last one I can remember. Why would you want to use another pharmacy's SOP? Because the GPP states which SOPs should be in the pharmacy. So I'm not sure about that question. If you updated a CPD, then the update will not be relevant to 4.6.
You mean an SOP?
Yeah, if you updated a SOP, that's in 4.4. If you apply the SOPs, that's 4.6. Rihanna, I don't know if you want to add. I can't remember all the questions.
Yes. If you want to do 4.6, then it is apply a SOP and apply a policy. If you develop an SOP, it forms part of Adele. You said it now, 4.4, I think.
4.
Yes.
Yes.
So yes, but don't use another pharmacy's SOPs. Use your own pharmacy's SOPs.
I am doing domain 4.6 and the documentation in the pharmacy is mainly titled as a policy. If the policy contains a standard operating procedure, will it be seen as a policy and SOP and be sufficient?
Okay.
Sorry, Mikado, you can go.
Yeah, I think we have already clarified that normally, maybe colleagues can add, normally the policy is like at a higher level, then the SOP is like, for example, if you're in a pharmacy, you want to describe the steps of how to do the activity. That is what you'll end up having the SOP. But normally a policy is like at a little bit higher level to say maybe a group of pharmacists, this is the policy of how you do the action. So that is how I know about, even in government. For example, in government, the policies will be coming like the provincial level and also at national level. But the SOP is just like something that we can do internally.
For 5.3, do all our behavioral standards have to relate to each other? If not, how do we phrase our learning need to relate to all the behavioral standards?
Okay, I think I'll start with this one. If you look at the behavioral statements for 5.3, it talks about code of conduct, it talks about indemnity insurance, it talks about staying up to date with new legislation, applying all the different Pharmacy Act, Medicines Act, and GPP. So it's all of them are ethical and legal practice. So as you listen to the behavioral statements, it's clear that you can only have a Schedule 6. That will not be sufficient. But if you talk about ethical and this scenario triggered your learning need, and this made you realize that pharmacy is based on ethical and legal practice every day. And then you go from there to work in all the behavioral statements that you have to meet. Then you can describe it that way. But interns focus only on a Schedule 6. And then when the evidence comes, then all of a sudden, here's my professional indemnity, and it pops up, and there's the code of conduct, but they haven't spoken about it from the beginning. I don't know if I'm addressing the question, though. I don't know if my colleagues can assist.
Question from YouTube. Please explain what is meant by self-assessment for competency, provision of education and training.
Okay. Self-assessment is like you assess yourself. Let's say you want to do a particular activity that you have never done before. So for you to be able to pick up maybe the gaps that you may want to address, you will have the self-assessment. You'll have the questions to assess yourself. I think that is what a colleague said when we were presenting that normally the interns, they provide the assessment done by the participants, but we want to see the intern, him or herself, having done the self-assessment to gauge which areas are the gaps that may be addressed by completing the CPD.
Yes, and if I can maybe add to that, if you look at the competency standard for 6.2, it's the provision of education and training. If you have to do a self-assessment to determine your own learning needs, because what some of the interns do is say they are going to provide training about, let's say, diabetes. Then they have 3 questions and say, do I know what the diabetes is? Do I know what medication is used for diabetes? And do I know what health lifestyle modifications I should suggest. And then they said, no, I don't know. So that's my learning need. Remember, your learning need and your self-assessment is the ability to provide education and training. So you have to assess yourself to determine your own learning need in relation to the competency standard, the provision of education and training. So yes, you have to see what you don't know about the topic that you're going to present about, but you also have to know what do you need to learn about providing education and training to your audience.
For the previous question 4.4, quality assurance, the updating of the SOP and training of the SOP are in the same behavioral statement. Do we have to submit evidence for both statements within the same behavioral statement or either or?
No, it's not either or. It's a whole behavioral statement. So you have to address a whole behavioral statement. So if you can address the 75% of the behavioral statements, but if you address a behavioral statement, you have to address the whole behavioral statement, unless there is an or in the behavioral statement.
What am I to do when neither of the tutors, past and present, show any interest or any support for me during my internship?
Babang, I don't know if you want to take this question or somebody from council, but I do think you have to have a conversation with your tutor. And then if you don't get any assistance or any feedback, you do have the ethical rule, and your tutor is supposed to assist you and maybe inform council.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I wanted to say, that if you're not really getting help, yeah, I think the best thing is to ask council to assist, and we will try to intervene. Usually for the few cases that were reported, we managed to resolve or to assist the two to resolve, and then the tutor came back and to be active and assist the intern again. So in case you are unable to resolve or you don't know what's happening between you and your tutor, why are you not getting the support that you are expecting, please talk to us, and then we will see how best we can assist. Thank you.
For domain 6, competency standard 6.2 for provision of education and training, behavior statement B, performing self-assessment and identifying their own learning needs. It wasn't specific on the manual that the self-assessment was to be done by whom, as I thought it would be for my attendees only. So if I have not provided my own self-assessment but other behavioral statements were met, will that make my whole CPD unsuccessful?
Yes, if I can start with that one, it probably will, because there are only 3 behavioral statements, and the assessor will be looking for your self-assessment, depending on how you presented the CPD. But based on the question, I would say it would be not yet successful.
How can domain 1 competency standard 1.6 be multidisciplinary in a community pharmacy?
If you look at behavioral statement A in 1.6, it clearly says engage in lifestyle changes in a multidisciplinary setting. So if you are not working in a multidisciplinary setting, then you will probably not be able to do 1.6, which is primary health care. If you have more than one discipline working in your pharmacy, then that might be doable. But I don't think you will be able to do 1.6 if you're in a community pharmacy with no other disciplines working in the pharmacy. I don't know if my colleagues would like to add something to that.
Yeah, you are right, because you need other team members. Obviously, if you are working in that community pharmacy where it's only pharmacy personnel, then you don't have other discipline, other cadres as well. So then doing that CPD then won't meet the requirements, since you won't have evidence to prove that.
I am really confused about what I need to do for 5.3 and 4.6.
Okay, that sounds like a statement and not a question. So for 4.6, you need to show the assessors and the moderators that you can apply policy and that you can apply a SOP. So you need to put in your evidence a policy and a SOP, and then additional evidence that you cross-reference and link and annotate to your SOP and your policy to prove or to show how you have applied it. Remember, we are not there. The assessors and the moderators are not with you in the pharmacy. So we cannot see what you're doing. You should show with your evidence what you have done. 5.3 is ethical and legal practice. I just want to get to the behavioral statements there. I can't remember them off by heart now. Dal, if you want to carry on so long.
Talking about you should show how you apply the Pharmacy Act, the Medicines Act, the GPP. It talks about scope of practice. Then it talks about keeping updated to legislation. It talks about code of conduct and professional indemnity insurance. So for behavioral statement A, you should provide any evidence to show us how you adhere to the Pharmacy Act, the Medicines Act, and the GPP within your daily practice. And anything you can think about. Remember, our profession is regulated by laws. So everything you do in the pharmacy, not only Schedule 6, you can show us that you applied. If you work under supervision, you've applied the Pharmacy Act. If you provide a patient with a Schedule 2 at the OTC counter, you've applied the Medicines Act. If you go and look for new regulations regarding something that's been published, you want us to show where do you look for new legislation? Are you going onto SAPRA's website to find the new schedules? Are you going onto Pharmacy Council's website to find new legislation? Show us what you do to stay up to date. Are you doing other CPDs? So there's a lot of things that you can do for each behavioral statement. So show us, how do you do the Medicines Act? How, if you do the GPP by evaluating a prescription, and the Medicines Act by patient confidentiality, that is code of conduct. So there's such a lot of things that you can show us that you do daily. Rianda, I don't know what you want to add.
No, I think you have provided sufficient examples of how 5.3 can be addressed.
Another question on CPD 5.3. Can I use the same prescription as a trigger and as evidence in the case of recall of medicine?
No, don't use the same evidence. There's sufficient evidence to use different prescriptions for everything, I would say. Unless you have I don't know if I'm understanding correctly, for the recall, is it another competency standard? Or is that part of 5.3? So if it's part of 5.3 and it hasn't been used previously, then yes. But if you have used it for the recall, then don't use it again in 5.3.
For 6.2, what is the minimum number of colleagues we need to train?
There's no minimum number of colleagues. Yeah, I would say at least 2, but there's no minimum.
All right, and our final question. Can I use the same concept, example, Schedule 6 prescriptions, but different prescriptions for 2 different CPDs?
Yes, you may, as long as you don't evaluate them in both CPDs or do the same activity, because it should be a different learning need. But yes, you may.
That is all for the questions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Noctula. I think this was our last question for tonight. And let me take this opportunity to thank all the colleagues for availing themselves and also for participating. I hope all your queries are now resolved and you will be able to submit better CPDs moving forward. Please don't forget to complete the survey. Like I said, we're going to use that as a proof of attendance. And other than that, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being with us till this late. And we wish you a good evening. And I also want to thank the presenters of today's the workshop, as well as the team from the office. And with those few words, thank you, and let's call it a day. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Goodbye,
Bye-bye.
everyone, and good luck.
Good luck and goodbye.
Bye.